Welcome to episode 112 of The Route presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as they share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Chris Nascimento, and let's get started. And if you're a listener of this podcast, there's a couple things before we get into today's guest. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see on the top hand corner, it says The Route, then underneath it says at The Route Sports. So that is where you can find us on all social media. If you're listening to this podcast, maybe a great platform for you to check us out on is LinkedIn, right? So maybe you can grow your network, you can start your network, or even just maybe find new people to connect with. So that's a great place. It's at The Route Sports. And feel free to connect with me or maybe potentially even guests as well. And then from LinkedIn, we also have, all the, traditional platforms, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. All the good stuff there. We have podcast clips now where you can kind of catch all the little snippets of the episodes. So that'll be good stuff. And then for the YouTube, it's underneath the White Whale Marketing YouTube channel, and we have the Route playlist. So check it out. On that note as well, if you're listening to this podcast, we appreciate you listening, but may I ask you just to take the time to subscribe or follow to the podcast, right? Whether that's on Apple, Spotify, Google, even YouTube, following the channel, rating 5 stars, leaving a like, or even just leaving a nice review. That just allows us to grow a little bit easier. And then we can kind of continue doing these podcasts and getting these great guests for you. So take the time to do that, as much appreciated. And the last thing before we get into today's guest, quick little message from BetStamp.
Damn it, I lost another bet. I always do this. Why can't I win at least one?
Need an edge in sports betting?
BetStamp allows you to compare the best available odds among sports books. To get an edge in sports betting, download the BetStamp app and use the code WHALE to get access to all the affiliates and pricing. The only way to get an edge in online sports betting is by having accounts with multiple sports books.
Yes.
BetStamp.
So I'd now like to welcome someone who's working within an innovative space of sports, Director of Partnerships at FanAi, John Abreu. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Doing well, Chris. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for coming on. It's always good to get going. I can finally stop talking, but maybe let the guest do a bit more talking, which is always nice. But yeah, as the podcast name states, The Route. So let's get into it. What is your route? So maybe where did it begin and how did we get to the position we're in today?
Yeah, I mean, it's my route is probably a long and winding road, and maybe like atypical, I guess, of somebody who works now in sport, more of like an ad tech solution as opposed to sport tech, so to speak. So, I mean, I've been involved in sports since I was a kid. So I played everything that I could through high school, and what I'd figured out is that I was never the best athlete on the field, but I can somewhat start to get a little bit closer to the better athletes through training. Mm-hmm. And when I got to university, I was kind of in a bit of a dilemma. My parents are both academics. I definitely was more drawn to sports. I tell people that I'm kind of like a mixture between an egghead and a meathead. And what I kind of wanted to find is something that, satisfied my parents, satisfied me ultimately, but satisfied my parents in terms of the academic rigor, but also kept me close to sports, which was what I wanted to pursue. So I pursued a degree in kinesiology, and at the same time, I found an internship in strength and conditioning. And that's ultimately what I very early in university decided I wanted to be. I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. I wanted to only work with athletes. That was my only interest. And I dove headfirst into that, put as much energy as I could into shadowing other coaches, learning as much as I could from my mentor at the time, Derek Hansen, who was a strength and conditioning coach at Simon Fraser University, and now is just a consultant for a few different NFL teams. Learning as much from him, getting all the certifications I needed, surrounding myself with other people in my program who were also very motivated and driven to kind of pursue that career goal. And after I graduated, was fortunate enough to work as his assistant at Simon Fraser University. So had a little bit of success there, went to a few NCAA Division II Final Fours, worked with basketball teams there that also went to a Sweet 16. And at a certain point, I decided this is great. I have a lot of opportunity here, but my role was partly available because of fundraising that I myself did to make sure that I had a salary. So I'd kind of been hustling on like the marketing, sales, program development side since pretty early on. I thought that I wanted to find a role that I was just focusing entirely on strength and conditioning. I managed to start working with the Canadian Sport Institute, initially in Calgary, and then at CSI Pacific, working with the Canadian slopestyle snowboard team. And I thought that at that point I had kind of reached the pinnacle of the level of athletes that I'd be working with, especially in Canada. But what I actually found was that I wasn't really suited for working in that kind of regimented institution setting. You're kind of bound by things like culture, and this is the way we've always done it, and the people who maybe drive the bus aren't the ones that are best educated to make certain decisions on things that I thought to be my expertise. Like the same way that I wouldn't tell a coach how to run their practice or something like that, or how to develop a skill. I was finding that there was a lot of oversight that was based on snippets of knowledge or things that had been heard down the grapevine, as opposed to some of the things that a lot of my colleagues who are still in the field have come to develop and understand through years of experience. So that, coupled with other things, kind of made me realize that if I wanted to have the impact that I wanted to have on the sport industry as a whole, I needed to move up. I needed to be more in that leadership space. So instead of being the person that coaches athletes, I wanted to be the person enabling coaches that then work with athletes. So through a position that I kind of sourced through just networking, I managed to become the high performance manager at BC Rugby. So finally, I had a little bit of a leadership role within a provincial sport organization. And at the time, I also got my first taste of, I guess, like a formal sales program working with a sport wearable company called Push, who just recently was acquired by Whoop. And it was a tough, I guess, 2-job stint to maintain. I had my regular 9 to 5, and then I tried to piece everything else around my role. And it didn't quite work out the way that I would have wanted, but I learned a ton, and I guess it kind of spurred me to continue developing a little bit in sales and marketing. Also helped do some contributions and a little bit of work around strengthpowerspeed.com, which is a website that's maintained by my friend and mentor, Derek Hansen. So after a couple of years of working with the BC Rugby Union, I kind of realized that it wasn't necessarily the people, that I was working with in those in government-funded amateur sport, but maybe the system kind of limited how much you could innovate and continue to drive forward to really change it, to really impart a culture shift that was going to put athletes in better positions to be successful. And I made the very difficult decision to just leave sport performance and that kind of ground level coaching as a whole.
Yeah.
Still did a little bit of that. The last athlete that I worked with went to the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. I no longer work in that athlete development space, and my connection to grassroots sports is trying to find some sort of board position where I could still continue to impact sport and share my experience, as well as doing some officiating, because it still allows me to pretend that I'm an athlete and run onto the field with, I guess, the guys that still play rugby. So from there, I started to make an assessment as to where my skill sets and interests lied. And I really liked the idea of tackling a problem, finding a solution, and working with clients to achieve something. So it's still very analogous to my skill set that I developed in coaching. And I started to look for roles in sales and marketing. Serendipitously, I started coming across job postings for this company called Blonix, a sport nutrition company based out of Vancouver. And I asked a friend of mine that owns a local CrossFit gym about the company because they were very entrenched as part of that community, and spoke really well of them. I kept seeing them. Ultimately, I asked for a connection. I met the CEO of the company for coffee. His name is Rowan Minion, and we talked about some of the roles that were open and what I could bring as part of the team. And he invited me to apply. And then from there, kind of got my first formal full-time position in sales and marketing. Moved very quickly through those ranks. Eventually, he gave me a similar title to what I have now in Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships, where I had the opportunity to lead my sales team, start to build a team around me, a strategy around me, different go-to-markets with new products. And, we had started having some success. And then we were actually on our way to having our best month in company history in March of 2020. And then we know how March of 2020 ends. So it was a little bit of like a nerve-wracking time through March, April, May, because we were very reliant, especially my sales function was very reliant on gyms that sold our products, which were now closed, and shops that sold our products, which were also closed. So we kind of pivoted. We had to whittle down a sales team, and then it became a problem to tackle. It's like, how do I do sales without having the same size team around me? So kind of figured out some strategies there. And then, as I'm sure that you've heard from other guests in your podcast, when you're working in a startup environment, you're a bit of a jack of all trades, but master of none. So then started to work a little bit also in managing the global supply chain, from sourcing materials through manufacturing, through packaging, through logistics of getting them to our warehouses throughout the world. So I look back very fondly on that memory because I feel like it gave me a hands-on business school education. Like there was no case studies that I could do with a team. It was, we need to solve this problem, and you need to solve it in real time with positive results, because company future is impacted by it, and your own success is also impacted by it. Then I was kind of presented with this opportunity at FanAi that I thought was really interesting to try to vault my career forward. I had kind of been eyeing my next move into tech, and I spoke with the VP of sales there. His name is Adam Holt, and we had actually worked together at Push and kept in good contact over the years. So went through the process with them, and that's been, there wasn't like an on-ramping, I guess, like there wasn't a climb there. It was a wall. It was like a rock climbing wall that I needed to tackle in terms of coming into a new industry, a new product. It's a tech product, and a tech product that straddles, different verticals potentially. And also the sales process was much more complex than what I had been used to. But, I'm still being put in positions where I can be successful, and it's a pretty exciting product to be part of. Essentially, what we do is we tie real customer fan avidity data to real purchase outcomes to give companies a glimpse as to what their sponsorship efforts are actually deriving in terms of revenue results. Yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at now. So hopefully I didn't take too much time in your...
No. It's perfect. I know sometimes people, after they say their route, they're like, oh, man, I just went. That's the whole purpose of the podcast. Right? It's called the route. That's the most important part of it. So some people go, some people want to go past an hour, I think I've had in the past. and I've had other people just go 2-3 minutes, and then we kind of walk through it together. But no, I think you went through it perfectly. And
All right.
sorry, yeah, I already have of course, since you already shared your route, I got questions to kind of get into from there. So I like going all the way back to the beginning and kind of work our through it.
Sure.
It's the natural progress, let's say, right? So one of the things you're mentioning at the beginning, right? You're talking about almost like the dilemma between your parents being academics and you having an interest in sport, right? And you're trying to find a way to combine the two. And I think that's super interesting topic to get into, because the nature of this podcast, right? Maybe a lot of time the people listening to this, obviously we have people of all different positions of life listening to it, but for the most part, it's probably people at the beginning of their careers or maybe just starting off. So they're really listening to how does this route begin, right? And it all kind of starts with school sometimes, where people are asking, hey, what program should I get into? Or like, hey, why did they decide this? Or why did they go to that school? So you kind of touch on why you went into HA. Obviously, it was your passion, but was there ever an instance of like, oh, maybe I'll go do business or I'll go do something else? Like, did you ever have that moment where like, oh, I don't know about HK?
To be honest, when I was in university, no, I had like the full blinders on of like, this is what I want to pursue and this is what I want to achieve. I think it still took me some time to get there. I took a couple of gap years before I decided to go to university, which again, with my parents both being academics, was a very interesting dinner conversation when I decided to tell them that I was going to, at the time, work at the International House of Pancakes and for a couple of years to make money before I decided to go to university. So, and I still carry that joke onwards in that my first job allowed me to wear mesh shorts to work every day, right? Mm-hmm. So it still wasn't a real job, so to speak. Yeah. But yeah, to me, I always had the blinders on as soon as I got in terms of like, this is what I want to do and this is what I want to pursue. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of mentality can be both positive and negative. Mm-hmm. Because, being outcome focused and working towards achieving a goal is obviously very important. But I think that you need to always kind of live in a space of being both like idealistic, but also objective in your thought process. So a lot of the time, you kind of, your next question is more of like, what do you want to study in school? Mm-hmm. Whereas maybe I think a better question to pose for people going into university and thinking about what they're going to pursue is like, well, what do you actually want to do as a vocation? What does that vocation pay? What if you get there and you don't like it? What are the tools that you are then prepared with for lateral mobility? And then from that, kind of reverse engineer it to look at what it is that you want to do in university. Because the number of colleagues that I went to university with that started out their kinesiology program saying, I want to become a physiotherapist, compared to the number that actually get into physiotherapy school and then graduate. That's a pretty big bottleneck there. And so I think I've taken your question off into a little bit of a tangent, but my experience was that I had the blinders on. If I had a chance to go back to it, or if anybody that reaches out to me I had a couple of university students who are now graduated and pursuing their own career in strength and conditioning that had reached out to me. And obviously I like to make sure that the next generation is set up for success better than me. I want to leave that place in a better state than what I found it. But I kind of tried to challenge them to, open up the blinders a little bit and think like, well, what if this doesn't work out, right? Everybody wants to work with athletes, but there's 150 professional teams in North America in the major sports leagues, right? That doesn't leave a lot of positions to work with pro athletes.
Yeah, no, that's kind of an interesting way to think about it, right? Because I think, so at the time of this recording, I posted a clip for episode 97, and the last clip I just posted, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of touching on something similar, right? Where it's talking about people in sports, right? They're like, oh, hey, I'm going to get a sports management degree. I'm going to work for my favorite sports team and go like that. But then the clip was kind of touching on how, yeah, but what if you don't like it, right? Like, because sports isn't cut out for everyone, right? Where it's a lot of hours, you're expected to do a lot for a little, and then there's some of these things where it's not as I don't even know the word they use in the clip was, it's not as glamorous as sometimes people make it out to be in their minds, right? So then there's these elements like you're saying, well, let's say it is physio, or let's say it is becoming director of partnerships for a professional team in Canada. What if that doesn't happen? Like, what are you going to do? Are you just going to be like, oh, well, I'm stuck, like I'm lost, right? So maybe really understanding like what your interests are and what things you can be, impactful in. But no, I definitely see that. Um, and then that kind of like leads me to your next thing that you're kind of touching on was in regards to that position you had in university, right? Where you're kind of getting mentored and you essentially said how you kind of created a role for yourself, but through fundraising for it, right?
Mhm.
Do you ever look back and realize maybe, because I view this with my career where it was almost so obvious I was always going to be in marketing, just in regards to how I consume things. Like I'd go to a Sens game, right? I'm in Ottawa, and they were doing horribly for attendance wise. And I was like, oh, if I was the Senators, I'd write on my notes on my phone. I was like, oh, I would do this, I would do this. I'm like, that's how I'd like get people in the building. And I was in accounting at the time, right? So then looking back on it, I was like, oh, like it's so obvious. Like, I just never clicked. When you're doing this fundraising for the role, was it ever kind of maybe apparent to you like, oh yeah, I'm going to be in partnerships or sales or different things like that? Or you could be, maybe I should say.
No. Yeah, like again, very, very much focused and blinders on. So the fundraising, the partnership building, the marketing, that was always a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm doing this just to allow me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that I viewed it, right? But again, this is kind of goes to maybe ties back to my initial point about maybe subjecting people who are coming up through university and allowing them the ability to explore options.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing is this kind of like nebulous term that, if people say like I work in marketing, people who know are like, well, like what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
And people who don't know are like, okay, like it doesn't mean anything. And then on the sales side, it's almost like a bad word, right? Like when people are, you tell them that you work in sales, the first vision that they get is a used car salesman, selling lemons out of a lot, or a pushy salesman that's coming door to door and won't take no for an answer. And I think that there needs to be more to educate the kids going through university or even people who are looking for a career change as to what does sales actually entail, right? What does that actually mean? Like, and what does marketing actually entail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some of them are great concepts that you might learn through university. And now I'm completely speaking out of turn because I have no idea about what gets taught in marketing in university. But okay, like what does it actually entail and what are the different facets of it? What are the different channels? What are the different stages in the funnel where they kind of intersect, and then they intersect with technology, and how do they support sales? So it's actually like a pretty tangled web. And so it becomes very difficult to see like, hey, this is something that I could do as a career when you don't even know that it's a career that's available to you. And so that was probably like a moment of clarity once I started to look for some of these jobs. It's like, you start off and you're 6 years old and you the jobs that are out there are like fireman, policeman, doctor. And then you get to high school and that potential job pool expands. Then you start looking around and you're like, I have no idea what a director of partnership does, or, what is a demand gen manager for a B2B company. Like the complexity just increases. And without you being exposed to what's out there, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. No. And to be honest, what you just said there about marketing, when let's say someone's like, hey, what do you do? And you go marketing. I do that all the time because I don't want to get into it. Because then what does that mean? And then like you try to explain it, they're like, oh, that's marketing. It's like, oh, like that's like what I do within marketing. You know what I mean? So then that's why I just try to like keep it. Hopefully people don't ask like what specific, because I'm like, oh man, like here's the whole conversation. Like especially when it's just something like crossing by when you're meeting someone for like quickly, like, oh hey, how's it going? But yeah, no, that's funny that you're saying that. But no, I definitely agree with that. And then it's almost more so like like even what I do now, even when I kind of started my company, White Whale Marketing, I was like, oh, like we're gonna, help athletes grow, right? Build their brands. And now I'm more in sales essentially, right? Because I'm doing partnerships and like I'm selling these different assets of these athletes or properties. And then if you were to ask me in university, I went from accounting to marketing. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna build a brand, I'm gonna be creative, different things. Sure, there's still creative elements to it, but I never really thought I'd be like in the sales aspect or business development aspect of it. But no, definitely agree with that. And continuing on with your route, right? You're talking about how you then, sorry, you then can continue on. You start getting more experience, right? You want to kind of get developed in it. Well, and one of the things you're kind of noticing was you're hitting like, I would say almost like a wall, right? Where you're dealing with this like rigid, set in stone, idea of work, right? Or like, no, you have to do it this way, right? And I find that very interesting because I kind of noticed something similar too, right? Where when you work with sometimes different organizations, like, no, this is how we do it. But then depending what your role is, right? Whether it's, let's say something like strength, where there's like new findings that are coming out and you're kind of like this innovative way coming up, or even let's say in marketing, we have these new creative ideas. When people have you kind of put in a box and like, no, this is what you're allowed to do, I find it very difficult to kind of grow. So was that one of those things where like, yeah, like that's when you really started to kind of reassess things?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was like my biggest impetus to try to make a change. Not even not just outside of into a different industry, but also within the industry to elevate my role to get into a position where I could actually impart change. But the growth there was also like prospective, and then has also been retrospective, where I want it to be prospective in terms of trying to find an industry that maybe the results were like very objective. So sales is that's actually one of the reasons that I like sales, is like, it has a mix of soft skills, but in terms of measurement, your success, it's actually a very objective profession to figure out whether or not you're delivering on what you said you would deliver. And there's metrics all around that. And so maybe that's like, if I go further into it, my dad especially was a mathematician. And so I'm very numbers focused. I feel like I've always data focused on that end. So I think that's one of the reasons I've liked sales. It kind of blends the soft skills with the hard skills of trying to, pursue somebody, but also measure your success and iterate upon it.
Yeah.
And so that was part of my prospective growth there. But looking back at it, and this is what I hope has been growth on my end, but looking back at it retrospectively, I definitely came into fields guns a-blazing, thinking that I was going to change the world, and I did a lot of things better, where I still believe strongly in my ideas, at least a good portion of them, but it would have helped me to carry myself with more of a sense of humility, and instead of come in and being like, no, crumble up a piece of paper, this is all wrong, like maybe get a lay of the land at first, understand how the dynamics work in terms of everything they did from preparation, scheduling, the way the athletes carried themselves, which is different across different sports, the way coaches like to conduct their operations, the way that I was being evaluated by superiors, and just really get a lay of the land before starting to like tinker on certain things, where I came in and I said, this is all wrong, we need to change it. I think that I probably come in with more humility if I had a chance to do it over again.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And what you're saying about like sales and being very like objective based, that's interesting, because one of the things you're talking about, you didn't go to school for marketing, so you didn't know like, hey, like what things are taught. But one of the very few things I kind of remember from my marketing degree was one time, a professor was talking about, hey, the people that are going to stay in the company when the company goes downhill, or like let's say they're going through hard times, are going to be the people that are adding to the bottom line, right? So easily, if you're in digital marketing and you're bringing money through the ads and getting like a good return, boom. Or you're in sales, boom, like it's clear, like, hey, this person's bringing in, Chris, John are bringing in X amount of dollars, and we need that to be sustainable, right? And when they kind of started saying things like that, I was like, oh wow, like that makes a lot of sense. So then if you go to, let's say, in branding for marketing, it's very hard to be like, hey, like I did a good job of creating this new logo, or how that actually impacts the business. So kind of what you're saying there too, where maybe at the beginning when I first switched to marketing, I'm like, oh yeah, it'd be cool, creative different elements. But when you start getting more into the nitty gritty of it, you're like, well, hey, how do I know if I'm actually being successful in this, right? Whereas in partnerships, when you deliver on that, you're like, hey, like this is a success because you can see the dollar amount and like the transactions, right? So I definitely agree with that. I think going back to what we were touching on there, do you find when you kind of had that sorry, that realization of, hey, like maybe strength and conditioning isn't necessarily for me at the moment, did you ever go on the route of, hey, you know what, maybe I'm going to go start my own thing and kind of I still want to stay within this space? Or was it such an experience like, hey, like I just want to get out of this?
I definitely thought about it, but like, going back to something that you had said before about the sport industry not being that glamorous. Running your own business as a personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach it's a very difficult thing to do, right? And I think at that point I had kind of rebounded a little bit from putting all my time and all my energy, sacrificing time with friends, sacrificing relationships, sacrificing time with family, sacrificing finances to achieve this goal, that the pendulum for me had swung in the opposite direction, where I was like, let's try to get some stability. Like, what do I want? Maybe stability is the wrong way to go about it, but start to think about, what do I want my life to look like, not just as my profession, and stop identifying as the strength and conditioning coach whose name is John, and more of like John who also happens to do X, Y, or Z as a profession, right? And for other people who have done in personal training, the time windows for you to work within that are very finite, very limited. You work before 9, like maybe like a 6 to 9. You maybe have a client or two at lunch, and then you work again after 4 p.m. Right. And you can do all your other business development, social media marketing, program design, etc., or your own training within the day. But then by the time you end up looking at it, a lot of your days, especially if you're successful, they start at 6 and they might end at 9. So I knew that wasn't where I wanted to hustle to have that at the time too. And I guess, going back to how naive I was about it at that time and still learning on the business side, I saw training as being like a one-to-one time to earning proposition. Do you want to earn more money, train more people, or become a higher profile trainer so that you can charge more? Right. Whereas like, I try to think about even some local trainers who have done a good job scaling their business. Elon Cumberbatch comes to mind. So he has done a job building his gym, Yard Athletics, as almost like a lifestyle brand. Like, not only is he one of, probably the best trainers in Vancouver, but he has created this environment where people want to go to there. He's enabled his coaches to advance their careers. People want to be associated with that brand. He is looking at selling online programs as well, which are much more scalable, and has elevated himself to the point where he isn't just working in the business as a trainer, but rather working on the business and how does he grow it, right? And at the time, I was too naive to realize, innocent maybe, to realize that was the potential of what could be done within it.
Yeah.
But he started doing that hustle of training a lot of people. Today, so I was not prepared to do that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I had a guest probably at the time of this recording, maybe like 20 episodes or so ago. So from maybe the early 90s, if you're listening to this. And after we had our call or our recording, we were just chatting. And one of the things we were chatting about was in regards to, he hit this fork in the road at one point, right? Where it's either kind of go with his business or, take a job at this career, right? Or within like some company, right? And then he told me the way he actually decided of, hey, whether I should, work for someone or, start my own thing, kind of go about it. He was kind of saying what you were saying, like look at it from, John the person or Chris the person. Like, what does Chris really want in life, not within his career, right? And he's like, whether that's freedom, whether that's money, so you could like provide for your family, maybe you retire early. And then he's like, that's how I then made my decision, right? And kind of going at it from that point of view, right, rather than being, hey, like, I don't know, I want to be working all these hours, but then if your whole goal is to, maybe create a family, and that's like what provides you the most value, he's like, then you got to reassess where things are. So yeah, it's interesting you say that, because even myself, I was joking around with my friends not too long ago, and I'm starting this business, and it's been over a year and a half now, and if I know what I know now from at the beginning, maybe I would kind of reassess things. So I was like, wow, it's a lot harder than expected, but it's going along, and I'm learning a lot. And now that I'm at this process, like, okay, like good. But if I knew what I know now at the beginning, then I would have been like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, no, that's interesting.
It's a pretty common saying. I wish I would have known then what I know now. But
Yeah,
I guess that's kind of the scope of your podcast, is trying to help other people who are in that position and expose them to that. I think
yeah,
to kind of expand on your last question, another crux for me in making that decision was, how do I acquire these skills, right? So I did do my own consulting for a bit, and it was really fun. Like, again, thinking more so about how do I consult within an organization from an organizational standpoint, as opposed to being the person with the boots on the ground. And I had started to get a little bit of traction, not enough that I was like, this was going to be my full-time job. But, you talk about your own process with whale marketing, and how you thought you were going to be doing more marketing, but now you find yourself doing more partnerships and sales to then get that marketing job. That's where the realization that I came to was, at the time, I didn't feel like I had the knowledge to be able to market myself efficiently to different organizations. So I thought to myself, how do I acquire these skills? Now, I could go to school, could watch a bunch of YouTube videos, or take random certifications, and they all have their values and their pitfalls. But what I found about myself is that I learn the best, and I can have found the most success in learning by doing. So being challenged with, like, okay, you've got a certain level of proficiency in this, solve the problem, and then that leads me down the rabbit hole of like, okay, how do I solve getting in front of C-suite decision makers, and doing that at scale, and how do I solve like the sales enablement piece for this tech product, and making sure that it's supported that way. And I think that was also a decision in me trying to pursue like a full-time role, was getting an opportunity to do it and learn as kind of as I went.
I think that's super important, because, so as I was saying at the beginning, I was initially in school for accounting, right? And obviously, you're still a student, you're early adulthood, it's fine, right? You're figuring things out. But in my mind, when I made the switch within university, and it doesn't miss your course load, because at the beginning, all the business classes are the same, but I felt I was, 2 years behind, right, than everyone else in my classes. So, like, oh, like, what could I do? Kind of similar to you're saying, like, how could I get this experience? And to be honest, if someone were to switch now, I wouldn't necessarily think going to school, let's say for business or marketing, would be unless you want someone that actually needs it. I think the most like you're going to learn is by doing, right? So then I started creating these assets, right? Where that's mental marketing is like this personal brand I created. And then I wanted to, do social media. How do I create a brand? So then I grew like this Instagram platform. And then from there, I was writing blogs. And then I was like, oh, the podcast would be good. And then once I had the podcast, I was like, oh, I should do partnerships for it, right? And then different things like that, where then I was able to apply these skill sets that I developed to like something bigger. Like, hey, like I can provide you value because I've been able to do it on the lowest level from scratch, right? So when you approach, from my standpoint, an athlete, like, hey, like I grew my personal brand and I have partnerships myself, and you're the professional athlete and you have zero. So clearly I know something that you don't, right? That's how I was positioning myself, right? Where that's the value that I then created. So
Right.
that's something that I didn't get in school, right? Where I was kind of like, hey, like let's get going here, like let's finish this up so I can actually start something, right? So yeah, I definitely see how that, like the doing, kind of getting your hands in it, really kind of helped that. And then what I was going to ask, because what I find so curious is, I'm sure it was daunting, right? Making that switch, right? Because like you're saying, like, hey, do I need to go to school? Like, how do I refine these skills? Was it really your network, I think, from what you were saying, that allowed you to make that jump?
Yeah, 100%. Like,
Yeah.
I'll joke that I'm not great at a lot of things, but I'm half decent at talking to people. So, I've kind of maintained good relationships with different people in different spaces, and yeah, it was. I mean, you'll hear it from people all the time. The hardest part, and there's some very skilled people, the hardest part of the application process for a job is standing out when all they get to see is a paper application, and that's sometimes scanned by AI. And as much as I believe in AI and the potential benefit and future benefit from it, it can be limited, especially for roles that do require maybe like a bit of an eyeball test or a conversation to check to see if that, whatever you put on your resume is actually real or not, right? So yeah, it's definitely been my network that has allowed me to at least get in front of people and put myself in positions where I could be successful. I haven't been successful every time that my network has put me in front of somebody else, but I'm definitely telling the survival stories of where I have managed to get a job.
Yeah. No, that makes sense for sure. And I was speaking to someone who's helping us out, and they got a full-time position somewhere, and they're sharing how the organization they interviewed for, what they really value is like the person, right? Like, hey, do you fit our culture? Do you fit like our team? And then from there, like we really believe if you fit those skill sets, a lot of what you do, especially as you're saying now at FanAi, you're gonna have to learn on the spot, right? And I remember when I first got my real job in university, where it wasn't like a part time, where I was like working full time in the summer. Um, I was doing it, and I was like, I didn't learn any of this in school. All of it was taught on the job. I was like, well, what's the point of? I still like think school helped with like soft skill sets, but I was like, I think anyone could do this if they're just taught it on the job, right? But then to get into that job, you needed that university degree or you needed some type of experience. So then I think what he was saying was the mindset that organization has was, hey, as long as they have like these intangibles as a person, then we can like work with them, right? And I was like, oh, like that's an interesting way to look at it, right? Because just because you don't have 10 years of sales experience doesn't mean you couldn't be then good in sales, right? Where I think it's a skill set that people can always end up developing, or even whether it's something else as well, right? So no, that's interesting. Um, and then on that note, though, because especially like something like sports or business, it is a little difficult. Like I even myself sometimes try staying connected with people. I was like, oh man, like it's been 3 months. And they're like, no, Chris, it's been 8. I was like, sorry. But then what types of like advice would you provide to someone listening? Like, hey, like whether it's networking or communicating, like what types of things would you share to them?
Yeah, I mean, it starts pretty early. Like I think, put yourself in positions where you can be mentored, or you can speak to people that are at least at the level that you want to get to, whether it's, a level up or two where you're at, or at the level that you want to end at. Sometimes getting to those really high level positions, it like getting through to them so that you could speak with them about anything is difficult. I know they have a lot on their plate, but yeah, reach out to people and make sure that you network. And I think, what you had just alluded to, the university still has value in terms of the soft skill side of things. Like that's definitely a big piece of it. Do I think the university is be all end all? I think no. Do I think it provides value? I think yes. Like I think having like even just organizing the way that information is presented, even the teachings around discerning information and being able to evaluate its efficacy, and I think that all those hard skills, so to speak, still have use. And so I would still say that there's value in a university degree, but what I would tell people to do is get the most out of your university experience and start that networking early. So, for a lot of people, university is just like go there, take classes, come back, and you're done. But building those soft skills through speaking with professors, being involved in student government, even in some capacity, being involved in club teams, meeting people at social events, meeting people at like industry or job search events. All of those can be used as rehearsals for when you actually do need to, compete for a job or exercise a set of soft skills. So that's where I would start it now. And then if you go to that networking event, or if you go to that conference, you pay your way through that conference, it can be daunting, because like I remember the first strength and conditioning conferences that I was part of, and there's Al Vermeil, and Al Vermeil was the strength and conditioning coach for the Bulls when they had Pippen and Rodman and Jordan, and so so he's got like 4 NBA rings. He's this Hall of Fame strength coach, and I'm just going through university, but you kind of have to take advantage of that opportunity to find out that he's like a really nice and open guy, and he was willing to give you advice, even if it was just a little bit of your time. And I think that you never know what's going to develop out of those conversations. Those are all opportunities that you can use further down the road. Yeah. And so yeah, it's kind of taking a chance on yourself, and that other people will see value in speaking to you too. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I feel like I keep going with tangents here.
No, that's good stuff. It's a podcast, right? That's what it's all about. It's having a discussion, right? Where I think that's super important what you're just saying there, where I think when I was in university, I was in the mindset of, hey, get the degree, get experience. Like, I was all about get experience. But I wasn't thinking about, hey, like only until the end, I was like, oh, wow, I could have positioned myself to companies like, hey, I'm a student. Let me come into the office to kind of like shadow you, or hey, like let me help you out with a project. And they're like, okay, sure, like we expect them not to know everything on this project, but he can learn, right? And like maybe it would be of value. So it's like low risk, high reward for them, because if it ends up being good, right? And then there's just other elements of like you're saying, kind of maybe even just rubbing elbows a bit more with classmates, where that's part of the network. Where let's say it's partnerships now, right? Sometimes the biggest thing in partnerships, like, hey, like I don't have a contact at RBC, right? And you go on LinkedIn, you're like, okay, this is the person I want to get in contact at RBC. Who do I know that knows them? And what if it's a classmate? You're like, oh, I should have spoke to them, right? Mm-hmm. So then just kind of making these connections where you can then, you never know where it ends up being. I definitely see the value in it. And that story you're saying about your first networking event, I have like the exact same thing. I remember like I was about to walk in, and I was like, I called my dad. I was like, hey, like I don't know what to do here. I'm like, I'm the youngest person here. Everyone else here is like 40, 50. And it's like that dynamic where if you're not used to it, you don't know how to like engage in that, right? Like, as you're saying, the Bulls, strength coach, you're like, what would I have in common with him, right? Me as a student, him as a Hall of Fame coach, how do I then like close that gap? So really kind of getting that experience and speaking to people and then just kind of humanizing it. I think it's like a huge skill set to kind of just take the risk and be like, hey, like kind of take some time, or hey, once maybe you get to know them, hey, can you be my mentor? Because I think that's like the biggest thing that's helped me the most, which is like getting mentorships or even just having discussions with people, right? Which is why this podcast is so great for at least me, if no one listens, what people do. Good.
Yeah, 100%. And, so two other things that I think I would add to that, like the value of mentorship is so high, because even though, we've kind of just brushed over it during this conversation, there's a value in learning by doing. Mm-hmm. It's probably worthwhile to learn from people who have done it and have made their own mistakes already, so that you don't have to repeat them, right? Yeah. And the other thing that I would add in terms of the university experience, and you talking about how you would have, if you had a chance to do it over again, you would have positioned yourself different, and you would have approached brands to start working with them. There are a lot of opportunities out there that are afforded only to university students. Mm-hmm. And, certain internships that are government funded that have a requirement that you're a full-time student with however many full-time equivalents throughout the year. And so if you view that as valuable experience, that's still something that the university experience can't provide for you, like the whole university experience.
I completely agree with that. And I guess like great conversation within this podcast, and just to kind of wrap things up, I like to put a bow on it with 2 questions I like to ask everyone at the end. I usually say there's only 1 question scheduled, but there's 3 realistically. So I like to say, and people have listened 112 episodes now, it's getting annoying. I'm going to live until I'm 103 on a rocking chair, thinking back on my career. I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. But if I ask you the same thing, John, you're 103 as well. You're on a rocking chair, thinking back to your career to date. What's one story that would stick out? Or like, wow, that was pretty cool. I got to do that for a living.
I mean, like, I like to, in telling, going back to the first question that you asked me about my route. Mm-hmm. And I think that I've had an opportunity so far to have such an eclectic mix and of opportunity as a career and vocation, and have achieved like different levels of success within that. And even now, like, I don't own a rocking chair, but we've got a pull-out couch in our condo that I can sit at, and so I can look back at it now and say, like, wow, I've had an opportunity to be part of like a pretty awesome things. Like, I have an NCAA Final Four ring. I've got an NCAA trophy that sits in my office. I've had the opportunity to snowboard in a mountain in the Yukon with the Canadian development team. I've sat on the knuckle of a jump in Whistler, Blackcomb, while Canadian snowboard team was whizzing by, and seeing like Olympians put down tricks that nobody else at the time had been able to do. Or getting the opportunity to like put in that sweat equity to the point that you feel like the company you work for is yours as well. And then now getting an opportunity to be at the forefront of this innovative sponsorship valuation, sponsorship measurement space that ties in like different sources of data, and is really what I believe to be the next wave of sponsorship measurement. Like, I look back on that now, and I'm incredibly fortunate to be part of it. So yeah, I think that puts me in a really good place to be grateful for my experiences. But in terms of my future, I think there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's great. And the last question I'd like to ask, we went into the future, then go into the past. We're talking to John, the strength and conditioning kinesiology major in university. What's one thing that you've now learned since then that you would like to impart on a younger version of yourself or myself or anyone listening?
Yeah, I would say, reverse engineer your future, right? Don't look ahead of like what's your next step that you want to achieve necessarily, but maybe look 2 or 3 steps past that, figure out what that third step away looks like, and then reverse engineer it from there, right? And I think trying to think that way, looking at like what is the job space like in sports? What is the graduation rate of students going after this profession? How many opportunities are there? How much do they earn? What is their day-to-day like? And, maybe if you look at that 3 steps ahead, you realize that pathway might not be for you. But if you look at other jobs, within, say, marketing, you realize that marketing isn't just like marketing is like, all right, are you B2B? Are you D2C? Are you influencer? Are you digital? Are you, I don't know, doing billboards by the roadside or doing creatives? And then once you kind of have a view of what that step looks like, then start to look backwards. It's like, all right, well, I would need to then go to university, get a degree in marketing, and then it would also help me to get some education in Google Ads or in Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, so that I can get this job in marketing, right? So I would say, don't just look at what's your next step and try to tick that box in terms of the next step. Take a couple gap years if you need to. Really think about what 3 steps away looks like, and then work backwards from there in order to achieve it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think Amazon, or I don't think Jeff Bezos put it up, but maybe someone from Amazon, they put out a book called Working Backwards. And essentially, I guess that's how they did Amazon, right? Where they're like, hey, like, this is what we want to become. And then they kind of did the path backwards. So hopefully, if people are trying to do that with sports, maybe this podcast would help, right? Where hopefully we can get people where people are like, hey, like, that's where I want to get one day. And they can work backwards, and then maybe even hear people at the various steps and how that is now. So yeah, I think that's kind of great advice. And hopefully this podcast can then help people that are interested in that as well. But yeah, John, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you reaching out and, taking that chance that I'll respond back to you and provide like a little bit of content for your podcast. I enjoyed the conversation, really back what it is that you're trying to do. And, even, from your own selfish standpoint of like trying to figure out what it is that other people are doing, but also putting it out in the open there for other people to reap the benefits of these conversations.
Yeah, exactly. It is, at the end of the day, it is somewhat selfish, right? Because I'm trying to get this value, take, time out of like, great people's lives. But at the same time, I think where the value exchange kind of evens it out is, hey, other people can hear this to you, right? And where I remember I had like this executive that reached out to me. They're like, hey, like I had them on and we were speaking again. And they're like, hey, like I never did a podcast before, never even listened to them. And now every time I go into a board meeting, people are like, hey, like we listened to you on the route. And then they already have like some things to work off of. And then he's like,
Amazing.
now I'm going to meetings and researching people on podcasts. And he's like, yeah, he's like, it changed the game for me. And I was like, oh wow, like who would have thought, right? Like some executive in Europe would be doing that now because of this. But yeah, no, it's interesting for sure. And yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, it's been great as always. Everyone hears that at the end. I always have a notepad. That's why I'm looking down. I'm not texting or anything. And it's always full. So when it's full, that's a good sign. And yeah, I really appreciate it. And that's a wrap for episode 112. So stay tuned for next week's episode. Don't forget to follow us at The Route Sports and follow, subscribe, leave a like, all that good stuff. But yeah, thank you for listening and see you all next week.